there's a lot of people who basically say, oh yeah, we know everything, the end, the beginning, and everything in between. And I would just say we need to keep examining and re-examining. Truth loses nothing by closer examination. There's absolutely nothing to lose by studying it closer. And I would just say there's a lot we do have a pretty good grasp of, but there's a lot more that we just don't have any clue on.
We aspire to become awakened beings, to live in harmony with the truth of life.
From Vast Noodle Media, I'm Trent Bell. This is Knowing and Believing, a podcast about how we believe. Okay, so welcome to episode number, I think we're around 5 somewhere. Episode number, fill in the blank here, of Knowing and Believing. Thank you for tuning in on YouTube or listening on the podcast. Today we have Shawn Brace, a fellow Andrews graduate, and I'm not close enough to that mic. Fellow Andrews graduate and pastor in Bangor, Maine.
That's
Bangor
right.
Church. And Seventh-Day-Adventist pastor of the denomination I was for most of my life. Currently kind of not Adventist anymore, and not
kind
sure.
Of.
I don't know what I call myself now. I'm.
You could be a Seventh-Day-Agnostic. That's one of our.
Ooh.
One of
I
our.
have not heard that before.
Yeah, one of our people who's in our missional community.
Seventh-Day Agnostic.
He calls himself a Seventh-Day-Agnostic.
I-
SDA.
I have a lot of psychological baggage and personality issues that I think are affecting me in a way where I just need to take a break from any group spirituality at this point.
Group, yeah.
Like and I don't know where I'll end up. Oh, and by the way, there's some water over there if you want it. I'll put it conveniently right next to you so you don't go dry.
Ah, gotcha.
And just take the whole thing. Yeah, so I have read a lot of stuff that you've read and shared on social media. We've spoken a lot in the past, and I really appreciate your thinking approach to things and really kind of questioning the status quo a lot, similar to what I've seen a lot of the stuff that Ty Gibson's doing recently, which I really appreciate his more thoughtful, somewhat philosophical approach to that. I'm always worried I didn't hit record, but I did. Good. But a little bit more bravery to go right into the difficult questions and approaching a lot of things from logic and discussing the questions that people come up with when they really start to doubt and question. And it was interesting. One of the people I went to SVA with had commented on, had started following the videos I've been releasing. And after SVA, after graduation, they had kind of gone through an existential thing and become atheist. And I had shared that light bearers thing, is there a God? Which I thought was a great discussion. It could have been a little more critical from my position, but whatever. And he was really taken back. He was like, wow, Christian apologetics has come a long way since I became an atheist. And so I think that kind of leads into one of our first questions here about how the landscape of spirituality, community, spirituality, and everything else is changing. And I know you've been thinking about that, writing on that a lot, and dealing with that a lot. So, Shawn Brace, pastor of the Bangor Church, Seventh-Day-Adventist. Glad to have you here, and just go right into the questions, I guess. And
let's do it, Trent.
And you had also mentioned you'd like to discuss a little bit like your experience with Adventism that had some similarities to what you've heard me talk about, but how it seems like you've had a different kind of, maybe not response, but kind of a little bit different experience and different response to it. So to go in to that as well, maybe first, because it seems like you have.
Yeah, it's good. Well, it's a good launching point because I listened to your episode with Caleb, and Caleb and I have talked quite a bit, and you Caleb, myself have kind of known each other for a little while. We did go to Andrews together. We didn't know each other really well at that point. Yeah, like because I am on a journey as well. And you guys talk about deconstructing faith. And I'm kind of at a place where I'm deconstructing church in many ways.
Yeah. That's
yeah.
kind of what I was talking about from seeing your post, which is interesting to me because I had always found this like every week, once a week, we come together and it's a very antiquated thing where it used to be very farming communities. And I'd heard something recently where the car was a huge disruption to community, spirituality, and everything else because that all diminished. And now with, I guess, social media and everything else, it's having that same effect.
Yeah. So I've been like re-examining and deconstructing faith maybe more broadly. Like I'm still firmly committed to and excited about like the big answers that, say, Christianity in general and Adventism in particular offers. I'm seeing very acutely where we have oftentimes focused on the wrong things in our faith and in our practice of them. And so I'm trying to whittle it down to its bare minimum and the essentials. And so I think a lot of what we've been doing as a church is majoring in minors.
Right.
Now, we could go into all of that and, it may be for another episode, but the thing that I'm finding is similar in your journey is that number one, yes, I am kind of deconstructing things. And I'm also, like you guys recognize, there's a lot of arrogance that is involved with, our particular community of faith and, a lot of Christians in general.
Well, I think any spiritual belief that's held anywhere beyond, general agnosticism as it, goes into that realm of, we're certain about this, that it crosses a line that I think becomes dangerous long term. I think it really to not hold it in an open hand and to think you've got it into a polished mirror finished cube, all of a sudden you don't have to think before you start jumping off cliffs or throwing other people off cliffs. So
but I think what I've kind of landed on is that Adventism at its best is, and that's the way I tend to try to look at it. Maybe, you and Caleb might be reacting to Adventism at its worst, which I guess I would say I've done as well, but I still see like really awesome redeeming qualities to it.
Yep.
And Adventism at its best was actually started on the premise that we need to hold things with open hands. We never would have existed had we not said, hey, there's a lot more that we don't know about, and we need to keep like examining and re-examining and learning and studying. And even a woman that Adventism holds in high regard, who is one of our founders, she says truth loses nothing by closer examination. Like there's absolutely nothing to lose by studying it closer and to questioning it and trying to wrestle with it. So like to me, there's a lot of Adventists who are arrogant, but Adventism at its like core identity is not at all opposed to questions and further truth and learning and growing, and saying, hey, you know what, we don't have it all figured out. Now, again, like I think you and Caleb experienced, like there's a lot of people who basically say, oh yeah, we know everything, the end, the beginning, and everything in between. And I would just say, I think there's a lot we do have a pretty good grasp of, but there's a lot more that we just don't have any clue on.
I would think if I were Mormon or Jehovah's Witness or Southern Baptist or any of these other very strong cultural faiths, that I would still be in the same position, that I would still be backing away from that, saying, I don't know if, or, maybe if I was Mormon, I wouldn't be as much because they have an even stronger culture. So I might have been 3 or 4 more levels of insulation and, process and entrenched maybe, and wouldn't be here. I'm personally very glad that I'm at this point. It is very painful though. It is very scary. There's a lot of existential dread and fear that will grip you at times. Like just this morning, I'm sitting there looking out the window, and it's just like you can't as easily push away that thought of like we're just highly evolved bacteria, just living on the skim of a planet that is going to get brushed off by a solar flare that's too hot or whatever. Those are really difficult things when you really start to allow the things that you've locked away to ground a faith and a meaning and a purpose. When you allow that door to open and say, have I placed these things here rightly? So those are very scary moments, especially when you have kids and everything else. It's a hard thing.
Yeah. I it's funny, just before you ask the next question or I answer one of the first questions that you asked, it's funny because Mormonism to some degree is kind of like my mirror as well. I was listening to Caleb talk about that. I read the book Under the Banner of Heaven as well, and I thought the exact same thing. I was like,
whoa,
wow, I'm reading about my own upbringing.
Right.
I also read a book about a Jewish guy who was raised
now,
in...
I wouldn't say like that was FLDS, but like kind of the thread that runs through it of this extreme confidence in your faith would be the relation.
and the cultural
right
indoctrination and reinforcement, all that. And I also read a book by a gentleman who is an Orthodox Jew, and that's a very tight-knit, close community. And again, same thing. I'm like, wow, same question Caleb asked. Like, if they're so convinced of their particular philosophy and worldview and faith, like who's to say that I am believing anything that's any more true? And I have actually a very good friend in Bangor who's the bishop of the Mormon Church, and so he's in my book club. I just saw him yesterday, and so the same thing. It's like I have a constant reminder of like, and I guess I have come to a different place where maybe you or Caleb have, and that. Yeah, I want to be able to critique my faith like in a way that can stand somewhat outside of it. But I just, in that critique, have still come to a place of greater satisfaction that, there's probably a lot of things that I do just because they're cultural. But there also, in my experience, are a lot of things that are true because I think they're true.
Right.
So, yeah. So now you asked the question like about just where we are, with spirituality today. And I would just say that like our particular community of faith, or mine, I should say mine, is I think going through some growing pains in the Western world, in that we are recognizing that it can't be just kind of the same old. And, and this is not a secret, and it's across all denominations.
And if I hadn't actually asked the question, I think I maybe haven't asked this question on camera yet. I think I asked it before, but the question that he's responding to that he already knows, we've discussed it a little bit. How do you see communal spirituality of our age changing, and what do you think is influencing those changes?
Good. I mean, sociological changes in general are... obviously a big question. And a lot of times they're reactions to what has come before it. And so I think by and large, for a long time, Christianity was not a communal experience. It was at least here in the West, like there's a very strong individualism where it's a very private matter and affair. And, it's like me and my faith. And even, as we approach the New Testament, especially, the idea among most Christians for the last, 400 years is that like all that matters is whether I am saved. Like that's the bottom line. Am I saved? And like when I die, am I going to go to heaven? Like me as an individual. That is to some degree a very foreign concept to the Bible, actually. And I think more Christian and biblical interpreters are beginning to understand that there's a lot greater communal awareness and concern scripturally. And I think that kind of mirrors society in general, where we live in an age in the West where there is a lot more openness to and eagerness for a communal social experience. I mean, it's kind of a cliche, but we talk about social media. Like, there's more and more social media, and yet people are more and more lonely than they've ever been.
Yeah.
And so, like, the desire for connection, I think, is just extremely strong in society in general. And churches are needing to recognize and adopt that posture. And what I would say is that's refreshing, because that is a very biblical posture.
Right.
And so in many ways, we're just trying to get back to the scriptural way of being the church. So
it's an interesting conversation for me, the idea of like the early American religious mindset, fundamentalism, and everything else, and the I forget what they call it, but the Great Awakening period, late 1800s,
Great Awakening,
and all that,
Second Great Awakening as well. Yeah.
Mormonism, Adventism, Jehovah's Witness, all the Fox Sisters,
Christian Science,
and all that kind of stuff too. Coming out of that, and then this kind of unique new thing of fundamentalism, as I think mostly a response to the Scopes trial, I think it was, with evolution and everything being taught in public schools, and how that kind of reinterpreted or solidified ideas that would more be in line with where people wanted it to be. And it really pushed it in, I think, in this era more so of this ability for certainty, and really kind of like, all right, there was the catalyst, now everything's set and it's not changing. We better get our positions because the battle's coming to change our minds and our culture. Where you look at the more ancient things of like Judaism, and you don't even name the name of God because you might put too much of your own ideas into it and pervert the whole thing. And, that kind of idea of God I can really get behind, because I do feel that there is just an immense amount beyond us that we don't understand. But these ideas of the ability of certainty, or knowing to the degree that people think they can know truth, is really, I think, deceptive. And someone had just recently shared something with me from Job that was really interesting, that the quote of, do you think you can know the depth of God? And I forget the exact quote, but it's so interesting to me now when I hear Bible verses, I relate to them so much more than I did when I was trying to relate to them. Because when I hear them now, I hear someone who's in pain and wrestling with the ideas of God, what they think God is, and what they thought God was, and how their reality is not jiving with what they thought God was and is, and all that. And there's far more of an emotional connection to it now than when I was trying to get myself to be in line and then feel like I was experiencing God or something. It's weird. I'm relating more to the humanity in the Bible than the ideas that my religion, how I perceived it, had made me think I needed to relate to it, which takes me back. I'm taken a little back from that. I don't know how to respond to that, because I haven't been really reading the Bible for probably 4 or 5 years now, and I've only really been attempting to pray every morning really for, probably a year now. And, I'm getting nothing, but there's still this odd, like, why am I relating to this more now? Am I just being more honest with myself and I'm open to hearing something? I don't know. I'm really just mostly processing this out in the open right now.
Yeah, that's good. That's the way to do it. And you never learn as well as when you try to explain something.
Yeah. Maybe that's it.
No, it's interesting because I think what you've put your finger on is that the idea of certainty is a very modern idea. And we, as many people like to say, we live kind of in the postmodern age, whatever that exactly means. But
mostly ushered in by the scientific revolution and the ability to be objective about certain things. Like, well, religion needs to jump on board with that too, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so Certainty, I think, in the postmodern age is not completely discarded, but it's maybe redefined in some ways where it's not a pure mathematical equation, a syllogism, if you will. And I think, no era has a monopoly on truth, and no era, even when it comes to scripture,
That's a good point.
like scripture is not a modern document. It's not trying to answer modern questions. It's not a postmodern document. It's its own historical context. And there's resonance with the modern age. There's resonance with the postmodern age. But we get into trouble when we try to project our questions into Scripture to some degree. But what I've come to appreciate is that when Jesus, when he's there, he's standing before Pilate. And, Pilate asks him, what is truth? Jesus kind of just stands there as a person. Because prior to that, Philip had come to him and, wanted to know what the truth was. And he said, I am the truth. So Jesus didn't try to, again, point to a mathematical equation. He pointed to himself as a person. So, that has many implications. It helps me recognize that there is more mystery to things than I maybe thought before. I spent a lot of time with Jewish people. I hang out with a group of...
They seem to have a real emphasis on exploring questions rather than clinging to answers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is great.
The old joke among Jewish people is that if you get a room full of Jewish people and you have 100 Jewish people, you'll have 150 different opinions on the same question. And my rabbi friend that I spend time with each week, he pointed me to a book, and I've still yet to read it, but I love the title. It's called Must a Jew Believe Anything? And the implication is that, and this is what my friend has said, Jews don't really believe anything. We don't have dogma. We simply have a way of living. And so I'm not ready to throw out quote unquote beliefs altogether, but I think it just tells me that there's a lot more room for mystery and not having to put everything in a box. That's a very...
See, that's something I've come to through all of this very deep confusion. I feel like the last time we talked, it was almost 3 years ago when we talked in person last time. I feel like I was just in an absolute emotional and cognitive fog, really not understanding outside of, I was in an aquarium before and I understood what was inside. And at that point I was kind of tip my head up over the top and be like, man, I don't get this. But I know that I can't completely stay in this aquarium, so it's a weird thing. But that idea of taking anything God or spiritual and putting it in a box, you could fit something like that in there and then you put it on the shelf. Well, what's the danger in having something so containable and able to be stored? It's to me, it seems like your faith and your opinions and knowledge and spirituality and everything else need to be something like a really well-used tractor that's constantly getting wear and tear and getting out there and breaking down and being fixed and used. Not quite so much like a, fancy piece of something like pottery or whatever that is on a shelf that you can use, for later when in a special situation and it's a really hard thing to kind of verbalize that without offending people. But all I can say is that I felt like I was trying to get myself to a point that I would then okay, now I feel like I've straightened everything out enough to now I can, God, I'll start to understand and experience God hopefully here soon. And it just was never getting there. And that's getting close to one of the last questions that's really important. But what you were just talking about kind of gets us to question number 3.
Question number 3, everybody.
Question number 3. Which we skipped question number 1. Question number 1,
can't
everybody.
Skip question number 1.
No. What have you learned about humanity through being a pastor? I know from being a pastor's kid and knowing a lot of other pastors' kids and knowing a lot of other pastors that and just from my own experience, anything that you do that you're passionate about, if it becomes your income or your job, it can wear you out and lose everything that was important about it. Now, for me as a photographer, I do not pick up a camera unless I'm working. And this is kind of my own creative theory, but I want to save everything that I enjoy about photography so I enjoy it when I'm doing it. So I don't wear myself out making creative things unless I'm working or unless I have a special project that I want to do personally. But I'm not the photographer that runs around constantly with a camera taking pictures of everything.
You don't take pictures of your kids for...
I've got like 2. I literally have like 2 that I set up lights and took and made pretty.
Wow.
And my wife will tell you how upset she is about that. She's hired other photographers to take pictures of her family because the cobbler's kids don't have shoes. That's what that is. But
I feel sad for you now for your kids. I'll come take them. I do a little
I have tons
photography.
of iPhone photos of them, but
so that's not real photography though.
No.
You haven't gotten to that point where you've surrendered to iPhones taking good pictures.
No, they do take good pictures, but there's psychology and truth behind things that you pay people for.
Yeah, no,
it's a different level of. I have to figure that out someday, so I can verbalize it. But yeah.
But we digress.
Yes. But yeah, what have you learned about humanity in being a pastor?
Yeah, let me also say that I'm deconstructing pastoring. So this is a process.
Again, kind of the thing that I've noticed from your social media posts and everything else that I think is valuable, that if everyone just kind of goes on business as usual, society advances, and the traditions that hold what were something that was initially valuable, if they don't, update, evolve, whatever, they get left. And I think there is value in a lot of religious culture, tradition, and everything else, but it gets antiquated, dated, and left behind very quickly because it's something that people call sacred, so it must never change. And so it gets discarded eventually.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the core doesn't necessarily change, but the expression of it, does. And but anyway, back to the question, what have I learned about humanity? This may sound very disappointing and like a cliche, but I have discovered that everyone's hurting, and everybody longs for some sort of connection. And everybody has emotional problems, and whether hey, right here, I do. And I've been reading a lot of lately on shame and vulnerability and emotional intelligence, and the reality is that a lot of the challenges that a pastor might face or people in a church might face, they don't have much to do with biblical issues. They don't have much to do with theological, philosophical issues. They have to do with just people having emotional intelligence.
I'm very low. I'm very low on the emotion. I think my wife's pretty high on the emotional intelligence, and I'm pretty low. I think I'm more in the rational, analytical, kind of area, but man, I really just run into a wall sometimes.
The fact that you can even articulate that you're low on the emotional intelligence scale indicates that you are not as low as you probably think.
I'm hoping I'm high on the self-honesty scale. That's I think that's just a choice you can make, that as soon as you can figure out to be look, just being honest about it, you've got nothing to lose. I found that sharing and admitting where you failed is just very healing and
step
cathartic.
Number 1 in the 12 steps.
Yeah, I'm just going to be on step number 1 the rest of my life pretty much. So.
Yeah. No, but that's it. There's a lot of emotional baggage that people have, and a lot of pain that develops through the course of one's life, and a lot of people just are lonely, and whether they realize that or not, whether they can articulate it or not, we are created for human connection. And I'm going to use that word created because that's term that I have landed on. But
It's a judgment-free zone.
This is a judgment. Thank you, Trent. I won't judge you either. No, we are, and even psychologists and sociologists who are not necessarily theists will say that we're hardwired for connection.
Yeah. I do find it kind of funny when I listen to a lot of evolution, creation debate stuff and all that. It's interesting to me. But you'll hear evolutionists say things like, well, we're designed to,
Yeah, exactly.
Like, wait. But I get, they infer that evolution designed that
Has
way.
some sort of,
But yeah, that's a whole different ball game.
But no, we are hardwired for connection, and
we
can't, we're social creatures. So, I mean, this is probably not all that profound, but that's what I've learned.
Yeah. I had an epiphany the other day, and I just spoke with this, I think about this a day or two ago in another podcast, but you being a very community organizing person to a degree, the difference, and this is a lot of the issue that I had with, Adventism as I viewed it, which I probably would have viewed any culturally strong religion as my experience.
Could I pause?
Sure.
Can you define culturally strong? I want to make sure.
Yeah, like any.
Don't lose your thoughts. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
you.
no, it's the difference between community and tribalism. So I don't forget it. But like a culturally strong religion is going to be, on the extreme spectrum. You're going to have like FLDS. There's dire physical consequences maybe if you distance yourself from that, and you look different and you look the same, and that's one extreme, and then you step back from that and you get more into the hue of Mormonism, Adventism, Jehovah's Witness, those the religions that are more it's a hubbub if someone's stepping back from it. Caleb and I would hear of people in like Florida that were talking about like they're questioning Adventism. Like, it's like, well, why is that news? But it's when it's a really strong knit community, and like Mormonism, Adventism, I don't know about Jehovah's Witness, but when you go to the same denominational schools, like grade school through university, that's just culturally strong.
So what I hear you saying is that because culture itself is not a bad thing, there's no implications of it. What you're saying is that there's a greater monolithism, if I can say that, like uniformity.
It's more of a monochromatic experience growing up in it. There's a uniformity,
in more areas, like a larger body of areas.
Yeah, and there's implied social pressure within that community, of staying within that community. It's far less of, if you were a Unitarian growing up, it's like, oh, you're going somewhere else? We'll have a great time. Come back and visit, whatever.
But that is a cultural belief as well.
Yeah, and I guess I'm implying in a strong cultural religion that it's, saying that it's kind of like a Cold War nation where there's boundaries, like you're not leaving, as compared to like a free country, like absolutely, and come back anytime.
Gotcha. Yeah. Good.
So it's in there. So so the thing I was thinking the other day, and I'd love your opinion on this, is that when you get into things like shame and guilt and everything else, and an idea of how you're going to approach life, how you're going to deal with it, how you're going to deal with pain, loss, and how you're going to relate to the unknown, and then take those things and think about now tribalism and community. They're both groups of people and how you relate. When you look at community, someone can be losing a mother one day, and that same day, someone can be gaining a child. And if you're strong within that community, it's like an emotional connective net where, on that same day you're losing your mother, you're also hearing about your good friend that's having a child. And it evens out the experience of life, and you can't go too low or too high without bringing someone else up with you. It's a tide that raises all boats, and it keeps a moderation there, and that's a way of I think community embraces ideas of love, sharing, giving, and caring. Now, if we switch over to tribalism to me embraces more the idea of control, of shaming, of exclusion, and conquering and overpowering, and maintaining control. These can be one and the same too, or they can weed out that. They can be lesser degrees in either thing, but I saw a lot of sprinklings of tribalism in these more culturally strong religions, where you got into ideas of certainty, where we know for certain that God thinks this about that, so X, Y, and Z, and to me, it plays into the further questions there, like how do we actually know these things, and by what means do we come to know them, and it feels like these ideas of certainty and being able to grab onto those things that are in a box will lend itself to tribalism more than community if you're not careful.
I might take exception in this sense.
That's not allowed here.
Okay. All right. I'm going to walk off the set. This interview's over. I don't know that the problem is certainty. I think the problem comes when my certainty must become your certainty at my time and my pace in the same time that I arrived at it. So like, I think Christianity at its core, properly understood, is very eager to establish certainty, but that precise certainty allows me to give you the freedom not to be certain at this moment. Because if my certainty is in a person who values me and cares for me, regardless of where I am at the moment with my certainty, that, influences me to extend grace to you.
Now, how would you define certainty in that situation?
Yeah. That's the $1 million question, isn't it? It is not, in my mind, an objective, like empirically provable theory or equation or syllogism. To me, certainty derives from, I'll just be open and honest, a subjective experience.
Right.
Like I am certain of God's existence because I've experienced him. I've not heard his voice audibly, but I'm certain about his existence the same way that I'm certain I really like pineapple juice. Like I've tasted it. I enjoy it. Every time I drink it, I am reminded why I like it. So certainty to me is not I guess the only way I can define it is by telling you what it isn't in some ways.
There's a vein of, not theology, but maybe theology that explores God by what God is not. Do you know what that's called?
Yeah.
It's like it's not apathetic.
I think it is
something like that.
Apophatic. Yeah.
Apophatic. That's what it is. Yeah. I was trying to explain it to Amber last night, and I was like, apathetic. And she's like,
I don't think that's it. Are you certain that's it? So, no, but I guess just positively, I would say certainty is a commitment to a personal encounter with something outside of myself.
See, now I can get behind that, but it's interesting to me that you seemingly had to have a little bit of like, I'm just going to be honest and open here, that it's a subjective certainty, that you might carry a little stigma that you might get in trouble for saying that.
But and what are you implying that?
Well, like it seems to me, and I'm open to being very wrong about pretty much everything, but it seems to me that you can get yourself in trouble within these type of circles of Adventism and everything else if you were to admit, well, it's only a subjective truth here that we're dealing with, but there's definitely a desire to say, no, this is truth.
I would say maybe not, because the reason I was qualifying it is because of your objectivist materialists who might be listening,
Mm-hmm.
who are saying, "Oh yeah, here comes somebody who can't test this in a test tube." Like,
Right.
So I'm thinking more about the skeptic than
Okay.
like I don't think that. I don't encounter a lot of Christians, at least in my circles, who would be uncomfortable with the idea per se that this is a subjective thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think most of us would say that there are objective evidences for our faith, insofar as we can agree upon what does it mean to be objective. Like, that's a whole other discussion, perhaps. But like the admission that this is a very personal thing, I think is something that a lot of people are comfortable with. Now, maybe, that's not been your experience, apparently.
Well, it's like as a kid, you'd hear the squeaky wheels, and you'd think, well, because they're the ones that are raising the stink, they must be the hardcore people that really have this on lockdown. And I don't know, you just like, I never had that kind of thing coming from my parents or anyone, that I really held in high regard. But I felt like the culture told me that. I don't know how to explain that.
I agree with you that there's.
I mean, as a pastor,
yeah,
you'll get these people in your church,
Oh, yeah.
and they'll want to slam down some doctrine, and they'll want you to. And if you don't, they're calling the whoever and the what and so, and you're getting the call at 9 at night, like, oh gosh, not this guy again.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
I would submit to you, and I was going to say this before, that the reason people are like that is not because they have certainty; it's because they have uncertainty.
Right, but as a kid,
yeah,
you don't understand
You don't process it
that.
that way.
Yeah, I mean, like now I'm getting to a ripe old age where I understand, and going through this process, I understand that, as you were saying, we are all so damaged in so many different ways, and then it makes us cling to certain things and insist on certain things and want to control and everything else. And oftentimes the people that are in some of the most confident, positions of leadership are the most damaged and oftentimes the farthest off. But they have a drive, an insatiable drive, because of this fear initially in some way in childhood or whatever, that pushes them to that point. And then the whole thing is really difficult for me because I'm just so, for some reason, not group oriented. And I love, again, conversations like this, but as soon as you get into a group, George Carlin had a funny take on this, is like, as soon as you love individuals, but as soon as you get a group thinking the same, they start to make themselves armbands and kill people. And,
That's true.
And so it's a different thing, like humans compared to groups and how you deal with them. And that's just intrinsic in community and church and everything else, which can be really difficult, especially growing up, like I did, in a community that had a pressure of, this is it, we've all got it, and you need to absorb this so you make it to the next level. And, I still don't know what to do with that exactly.
Well, part of that is why I'm exploring how to express my faith corporately in a different way, which is why I'm trying to move my congregation more towards sitting around in a living room with 10 people as the primary vehicle of, expressing faith and growing in faith, than sitting in a pew with 100 people where one guy is just,
right.
preaching at everybody.
Interestingly, at a church that we will leave nameless, there was
less than 1,000 miles from here. Or?
within 1,000 miles, in a galaxy far, far away, and a long time ago. Everything kind of hit the fan oddly, and I was just kind of like, I'm just, I'll stay at home and have people over, that kind of thing. And someone very close to me still felt that no, you have to go to the building where they do this, and there's a piano, and then people stand up and sit down and stand up and sit down and stand up and sit down and stand up and sit down, and then you have a meal that is, and different strokes for different folks. But, so I stayed home, and there was probably, 10 of us or so that would come there. And I still get, when I see some of them, they're still like, that was a really meaningful time, blah, blah, blah. But eventually at the church, someone said something eventually to Amber, like, don't you feel bad that he's choosing those people over you? Mm-hmm. And that really, that really hurt her. She came home and told me, and I didn't want her to feel that way. So I was like, all right, fine, I'll go back to, and it's just an odd thing.
Well,
very odd thing.
I think part of the concern about that sort of thing, and the thing that we're trying to do, is it's a loss of control. Mm. And I don't know what's going on in that house. And I don't know if Trent, like, what kind of conversations he's having with those people, right? And he needs to be where I am with my truth, because that validates my own security in that truth. The more people I get to agree with the things that I believe, the more I can be convinced that it's right. And I just say, I don't need a million people to agree with me to be grounded in its truth. So that's just where I am. And certainty allows me to give other people freedom rather than feeling like they have to be right where I am.
Subjective certainty.
Subjective, well, yeah, whatever you want, however you want to define it.
All right, so let's get into the more philosophical approach to, even before you step on the Bible as a foundation, the spiritual discernment, ration logic and everything else that would allow someone to, arrive here from a distant planet, and we're not talking God arriving, we're talking
an alien,
boom, lands on the planet, and you're born at 30, let's say, let's go with you were born, but you were in a coma until you were 30.
All right, good. Make believe. We can do anything we want.
Right. But how do you take the steps to then say, yeah, I think it's legitimately, okay to start to believe in something that is not really objective to believe in an objective manner. And so how do you define objective and subjective, and how does it apply to your faith?
Man, you gave me this question ahead of time, and I didn't think much about it. So that's
all right. You learn the most when you explain.
That's right. I'm going to make it up as I go, and at the end, I'm going to be like, yeah, that was true. Yeah. No, like objective. I guess maybe I'm going to sound like a postmodern here for a second. Uh-oh. Which, may be troubling to your random Adventist listener. I'm sure there's millions of them listening.
We're pretty small podcast at this point. I don't think you'll get in trouble.
No, I'm over, exaggerating a little bit, but like, I'm not sure I fully understand what we mean by objective. Like, what do you mean? I guess you've asked me how I define it, and I'm throwing it back on you.
To me, subjective would mean it's something that outside of us will retain the same properties, the same perception, 100%. And absolutely everyone will see it the same way. So the weight of a rock is an objective quality. We can measure it here, India, or wherever, and everyone's going, yeah, that's the weight of the rock. No one's going to argue about it.
Maybe.
Okay? But it's a relative thing.
Yeah.
It can be objective, can be relative, because you can take that rock to the moon and weigh it, and it's going to be different. So it's relative, but it is objective. It's an objective type of quality. The subjective is going to be far more, it isn't an objective thing that skunks stink.
Yeah.
Just because everyone agrees on it in no way makes it objective. Everyone is going to agree that skunks stink, but that's not an objective property, because good and bad are not objective qualities. They're subjective qualities. So it's basically, I can put objective and subjective in these two different camps and say everything over here objective. These are just qualities that no one's going to disagree on them, period. unless there's, quantum physics levels or something. I don't know. But yeah, weight of things, color even is subjective when you really get down to it. But then what it leads you to start to realize is that most everything is subjective, except until you get down to these razor thin margins of things that mean very little other than what they just mean, And that's someone had said something recently that I heard. There's the lowest form of meaning is like objective meaning. It only means what it means, and it doesn't infer anything else as a purpose or meaning or anything. It's it's like a thousandth of a decimal point kind of thing. So that's where I would put objective and subjective. So when it comes to things like spirituality, I have a really hard time with things like the Bible, because where I was starting at 3 years ago, I was trying to all right, I need something to grab onto here in an objective way. And there's nothing to grab onto objectively.
Well, see, I guess, yeah. So I would question that. And part of why I was kind of pushing back a little bit is because to some degree, what is implied in this discussion about objective or subjective is that something that is objective is inherently superior to, that seems to be
and again, I think that goes back to the scientific revolution. Why are we all living longer? Why do we have these great technologies? Why do we have everything material advantageous that we have now? Scientific revolution, scientific discovery, objective properties that we can pin down and then manipulate to the nth degree. And that's really bad when you start to try and do that to spiritual things, because they're just simply not objective in the same way.
Well, so I'm about to disagree with you.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Again, so do I have to leave? To me, that's why history is so important. There are historical claims that Scripture makes that allow me to sort of examine it objectively. For example, for a long time, archaeologists said, all that silly stuff about the kings of Judah, these people didn't exist. And as any good Christian archaeologist will say, the absence of evidence is never the evidence of absence.
Right.
And then what do you know? One day they discover a coin that talks about, Hezekiah or whatever. So these are, I would say, historically objective things that we can, test and so forth. Or, and I think I mentioned this in the past in email interactions, Jesus. And of course, that's to me, that's the whole fulcrum around which the whole thing, operates. Okay, number one, did Jesus really exist?
We can say he did to the same extent that, was it Alexander the Great?
Alexander the Great. Well, I mean, we can even say it to a greater extent, because the earliest historical documents we have citing Alexander the Great are 400 years after he existed.
Oh, really? Yeah.
The earliest we have of Jesus is some 30 years.
Right.
So, I mean, that establishes my confidence a little bit more.
I completely agree with you on that. I don't know that I'd necessarily call it objective, but a very reliable, historical evidence, right? That this man who said these things existed. To me, it's then when you go to and he was the Son of God, and he raised from the dead.
Yeah.
That's when you start to get into people's subjective experience of interacting with this person. And I know as soon as someone dies, they become a better person in the memory of everyone that was around him. Now, am I saying that's what happened with Christ? I don't know. That right now is I'm coming from an idea of I need something to grab onto objectively, 3 years ago to now, and I've gotten to a point of realizing that there's very thin objective evidence for me, and I would think that far more should be possible in the subjective experience of relationship and spiritual life in that way that I could experience maybe and hold in an open hand and follow that path and find it that way. I haven't really transferred over to that part of the journey yet.
Well, I think, I wouldn't be quick. Like, to me, what I was saying is that, okay, number one, did Jesus exist? I think you have to be really off out of your mind to say that he never existed.
Pretty adamant to proving that you don't want him to exist and not exist
like
at all.
Most people who have studied anything about Jesus agree that he was a real person, really existed. Then it becomes a question of, okay, what did he really say? And
Sure.
that's a whole other conversation and field and so forth. But then there's other things like, okay, this idea of a resurrection. Number one, did people really believe that took place?
Right.
Like, yes, there's a whole field of study that devotes itself to the resurrection of Jesus. Did he really? Well, first of all, did people believe he resurrected? When did they believe it? How did they believe it? Why did they believe it? So those are like questions that I think you can kind of, I don't know that they're going to turn an atheist or a skeptic into a believer. I think maybe it does happen sometimes, but they are questions that are worth examining.
Right.
And they provide a little more outside evidence than just, man, when I prayed this prayer, did I have a good feeling when I prayed it?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I wish there were more ability for the subjective experience of knowing rather than, dwelling within emotions and hoping that that's not just your emotions. That's the hard thing for me, is that I know whatever I want to be, I will be
Easily
in
convinced
danger of easily being convinced of that. And that's kind of you had mentioned earlier about something about stripping away kind of the humanity, not the humanity, but a lot of the human additive of a lot of things to see what's really there. And that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 3 years, is seeing, all right, how am I going to be misled by my own desires, my emotions, and everything else, to then try and figure out what's true.
I guess I would say, like, what's the danger in trying it out for a while? If, like, you're saying, man, I really want God to exist, but I'm skeptical that my desire will deceive me. It's like, why not try it out? Like, what's the problem with that? If it's not true, what do I lose anyway?
Right. Well, I mean, I'm definitely trying that now. I mean, I'm praying every morning and hoping that I'll just kind of like, oh, hey, but I'm getting nothing, and that's fine. I don't expect there to be anything.
What are you praying? Let's get personal here, Trent.
It used to be I'd swear at God a little bit first.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I think that's cleansing. But now it's just more so like I'm having a really hard time. Like, why on earth should I believe, the entire progenitor of everything that is can't even make a peep in any way, shape, or form outside of what could be explained as coincidence to let me know you're there. That's extremely difficult, to know that I have friends that have been inches from suicide, just begging for God to say something because they're so down and out and miserable, and they hear nothing, but luckily they don't pull the trigger. That
maybe so they didn't pull the trigger.
Right. But why, and I know Adventism has an answer for this, why God can't speak up, and in the character of God being, all that. And it's an odd thing to exist in that religion and know the end from the beginning, and to know how all the answers are there. And then get to a point of realizing that, the human psyche and emotions are extremely deceptive. The human heart, beyond anything, is deceptive. And then to realize how, belief cultures can change, grow, manipulate, degrade everything else. I can I can be left with the idea that there is something beyond, and I can attempt to interact with that and not really expect a whole lot, and hold it in an open hand, not condemn people for being born with a certain sexual orientation, because that is the major danger that I find is that, you know, kids born into Adventism that are gay, when they come to a point of realizing, holy cow, I'm attracted to, you know, the same sex, that their parents aren't going to accept them, their community isn't going to accept them, and they will at some point become suicidal. And what are we basing that on? You know, we're basing that on things that we've received subjectively and turned into boxes that we then pull off the shelf and say, nope, you can't do that because God won't approve of that. And you'll if you're Southern Baptist, you'll burn in hell forever, or if you're Adventist, you'll just go to sleep forever. So I have, all of that I just have to push off to the side right now and be still and know that there's a God, or be still and hope that there's a God, really, at this point. But yeah, it's a really painful existence, honestly, to go to from having so much surety, or the idea that I could have surety in the past, but never having it. So yeah, that's,
no, I hear you. I don't have despite what your experience was in Adventism, I don't have all the answers, but I know, I have a lot of peace, because we have, Camille and I have our own podcast, my wife Camille, and from time to time we interview people who are not, on the straight and narrow when it comes to faith, and just an interview with an atheist that we know. And I have a lot more peace than I think a lot of other Christians do in general, that like God's going to sort it all out and you're going to be fine. Like,
yeah, that's interesting. Like, I agree with you. Like, if there is a God, I'm totally not worried about it. Like, because what I do know is I'm desiring truth far more than I ever did. But what I'm scared of. Okay, so what am I scared of? Don't know. You'll have to tune into the next podcast and see. We had a really good discussion with Shawn, and it ended up going for almost 2 hours. So we've broken it into 2 episodes. You'll have to tune in to see what it is I'm really scared of when I think about belief in God and all that. And the next one will be just as good as the first, maybe even better. So check it out. And thanks for watching. Remember, you can support us on Patreon and follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, and subscribe to our podcast. Or if you're an Android person, you can download or listen to the podcast directly on our website, vastnoodle.com. Thanks a lot, and see you next time, or listen to you next time. Bye-bye.